And let's then go ahead and look at modifying databases. So today we are covering, will be that kind of the last day that we're covering stuff that will be relevant for the next project. So after today, we will have reviewed enough for you to be able to do that next modifying database project. And so let me just kind of give you an overview of where we're headed here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this online query. And I'll submit this. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit onto this second select clause. See, this is SQL Server. So let me just bring the top 10. Select top 10 from applicants and order by event ID. Submit. Okay. So imagine that you are somehow involved with making hiring decisions of professionals at your consulting company or whatever it is. And an important part of the skill that these new hires are going to be using is how good they are at using Excel. Not how good they are at programming Excel, but how good they are just at using Excel. And so you've designed for them some kind of workbook that has some tasks for them to be able to do kind of as part of the technical part of their interview process. Have you had this experience? Anyone had this experience where you're interviewing and they've given you like an Excel workbook with some stuff to do, like do some data analysis on this data? Has that happened to any of you? Yeah, so a few of you, maybe 1 out of 10 here has actually had that experience. It's actually a pretty common thing to do if that's part of what your job is going to be. But you realize there's a big difference for someone that's able to get in here and kind of quickly figure this thing out and do just exactly what they're like get down to business to get done what you're trying to have done, versus the one that really has to kind of fiddle around and not, try a bunch of things out and not really understand it. And so what you decide is, hey, I'm going to give them a macro-enabled workbook that is going to keep track of every change they make in their workbook and actually upload it to like a log that I'm keeping in the cloud. And so here what we have here is we have a table of different applicants here in the data. And then this is the log that we'd like to be able to generate. So we'd like to say, hey, at a particular time, a particular user was working on a particular workbook, and they were working on a particular sheet, on a particular address, a particular cell on that sheet. This is what they put into that sheet, and that's what was actually displayed in that cell at that time. So, we could say, hey, I'm just interested to see what a particular one has done. I can narrow this down from work log where username is equal to, I don't know how many K-worthens we have in here. Looks like we've got quite a few. So I can see just exactly what K-worthen was doing. I don't know if I'm going to hire K-worthen because like a lot of different times he put the same formula in. This is like, he's like changing it to the same thing each time. So, I can kind of see what does this person go through to get at what we're trying to do. Okay, so does that make sense what we're trying to accomplish? And so in so doing, we've got a database up in the cloud that we want to be able to send insert statements to, like when the person is actually using that workbook. So that's what we're going to try to do in class today. And it's somewhat analogous to what you're going to do for that project, because in that project you're going to be reading data from those FBI provided crime files and then figuring out how to write structured query language statements to insert data one row at a time. So the difference is, instead of reading data to read from Excel to write to the database, we're keeping track of what the user is doing, and every once in a while we'll recognize they did something, and that's when we'll write the data to the database. So that's where we're headed. So how comfortable are you with the task that we're going to tackle? You think you understand what we're doing? 5 is like, yeah, I get it, let's get on. 4 is I'm pretty close. 1 is like, is this Excel still? Okay. All right. So I've opened up the file then that we have here. Go ahead and download this ACCDB, which is an Access database. And the file we'll be working on is just dbwrite.xlsm. We're going to begin by writing to a Microsoft SQL Server in the cloud. And we'll also then implement the same thing, writing to the Access database. So we're doing both examples because like writing to a remote SQL server is much more likely that that's what you'll be doing in practice, working with like a corporate data resource rather than a single file database. But for the project, just so we can make sure that we don't like have some kind of database outage that's going to affect your ability to do the project, I'm going to have you be working with an Access database. But you're going to see they're really almost exactly the same as each other. Okay, so let's take a look at the code that we already have in this workbook. All right, so I've got here module 1, and I've got some here called an Acme subrunner that's called record edit. I'm passing it a sheet and I'm passing it a cell. Here's record edit. It takes a sheet and a cell, and then we'll go through what it's doing to do this recording here. But let's follow the instructions. So if you want, yeah, this is the same link to just bring up that same web interface to look at the data. But let's make sure that we have the references to our library included. I probably did not have this reference included when I gave you the file because I want you to have the practice of going and putting that reference on. So we're going to choose Tools, Options, Tools, References. And you want to scroll and find that Microsoft Data Objects, ActiveX Data Objects library. There's like, on my machine, there's like a whole bunch of them, 2.0, 2.1, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 6.1. I'm going to choose 6.1, just choose the most recent one. Any of those would work for what we're doing here in class. So if you don't have 6.1, just choose one of the other ones, you'll be just fine. Again, make sure you've got the check mark checked, and then you'll be able to say, okay. And here's a note to me to be able to delete the information out of that, like from the last year we did this example. I tried to delete it, but it turns out I don't remember the password. Apparently I thought I'd remember the password and I don't. So what that means is that, all that means is that we've got existing data in here that we'll be adding on to. Let me take Worthen off of here. And execute that again. So like the most recent one we had added was in May of 2023. So, wow, that's like after the semester. What does that mean? Like 4.6, that's probably also after we did this. It means like students were practicing this. Someone was actually doing my assignments, working on this code after the semester was over. It warms my heart. There's no academic reason they would need to do that. They were doing it for their own knowledge. All right. Okay, so let's ignore the subrunner here for a second because that's just going to invoke this. But let's just review this code. So we've got 3 variables declared here. One is a connection, right? So this is that object that knows how to connect onto a database. 2 string variables. One's going to hold the connection string, which is just all the parameters that we need to tell our object, our connection object, how to connect onto the database. It knows how to make the connection, but we have to give it the information specific for our database to connect. And by the way, where would you get that? I mean, so here's the connection string, and we're defining that right here. Where would you get this information? Yeah, you have to talk to someone like someone in IT, like the Office of Information Technology at your company that knows like the credentials to get to the database. And they may have to set up like an account specifically for you to use. In this case, we're all using this one called VBA user with the password being just that same thing in reverse. So this is just setting up a string that says, here's the information that we got to pass to that connection to be able to for the object, this connection object, to hook up to that database in the cloud. And then that's what we do. We're going to open that connection. So we're calling the connection object. We've made a new, when we declared this variable, it's an object variable. It's going to refer to this connection. Because we put the keyword new here, it tells it, oh, by the way, go ahead and make one of these objects and bind onto it all at once, which is nice. And so this is a little bit different than the last time we did it, because the last time we did it in class, we did not include the username and password in the connection string. Because you can leave that out of the connection string and you can specify the username and the password here. But in this case, I'm just showing you a different way, is that it's possible to put the credentials as part of the connection string, which is what we're doing here. So the connection string knows everything that we need, not only how to connect up to that server, but how to be authenticated on the server as well. So this then is going to open that connection. And here we now are building our SQL statement. Our SQL statement here is just insert into work log. That's the name of the table. If we go back and look at the query, we are selecting star from work log. And then here's the insert statement. So last time, the SQL that we wrote was a select statement. It was just to bring the data out. But the insert statement here is going to be what says, hey, we want to put some data into this table. Here's how it works. Insert into table name. And then in parentheses, I put the list of fields that I want to plug values into. I'm plugging a value into the username column, the workbook column, the sheet column. These are all columns in the database. We've got a column called address, one called formula, one called cell value. Do we see those over here? Yeah, those are the columns that we have right here. Now, event ID and event time, I'm not entering in those. I'm starting with username. But this table is set up to automatically generate a new event ID and to automatically plug in the time that this comes in. So I don't have to specify the time. That's going to, the database server is going to do that just because that's the way the table is configured. So here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values that I'm going to supply to make a record here. And that should be the same I have here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those are the same values. I'm saying plug values into these. And then we have the values clause where I'm going to put those values just right in the same order. I'm just going to kind of line them up so we can see K-Worthen is going into username. That I'm putting in this string into the workbook. Sheet 1 is the sheet that I'm putting in. A1 is the address. And the formula is here in the value. So again, that's just making a collection of characters that VBA has no idea what it means. That is a structured query language statement. And so in terms of VBA, the VBA interpreter thinks, okay, this is a collection of characters. I don't know what it means. I don't care what it means. It's just going to keep track of that collection of characters so that we can call the execute method of that connection object. And we are going to pass it the SQL. So the SQL that we set up here, we're going to say we want to tell that connection, execute that statement. If it has an error, it's not going to insert a record. If it does insert a record, we'll be able to then be able to see it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my own name in here instead of K-Worthen. My own username. And now I'm going to just go ahead and run this. I can run this by running my subrunner. Everything goes well. Oh, it did not. Oh, login failed for user VBA user. Oh no. And I remember I must have changed the password because I forgot it was in the code. Darn it. Give me a minute. Let me just see if I can. Let me just see if I can even get connected onto that cloud resource. I don't even know if I remember how to do it. We'll see if I can change that password. If not, we'll just switch over to work directly in the Access database. This is called Harpix. There's where I paid my last invoice to them. Yeah, and the problem is I just don't remember how to log on. Okay. So let's go ahead and switch this. All I'm going to do here in terms of changing this code is I'm changing the connection string. So here's a connection string that's meant for connecting onto SQL Server. I'm going to get rid of that one. And I'm going to enable the one that's for Microsoft Access. So the one for Microsoft Access doesn't require a username and a password because the database is not password protected. But it does need to know where the file is. It has to know the full path to that file. Well, the file you downloaded is called worklog.accdb. So if I go back to my, let me see, here it is, worklog.accdb. And this code is assuming that that is in the same location, the same folder as the workbook, because this workbook is at c:\users gln2 downloads. So I'll ask for the workbook.path, and it's saying that's where this workbook is loaded. And what I'm saying is I want to say, look, wherever this workbook is, backslash, this has to be on, this will only work on Windows. And so I don't mind hard coding the path separator for Windows in here and then giving it the name. So that's what we need. We have to tell it here, hey, this is going to be an Access database. That's what this tells us. And then this says, where is that Access database located? So now we just go ahead and open up that database. So I'm just going to double click on the database where I have it downloaded. So here's my file, dbwrite fall of 23. Here is that database. I'll double click it to open, and we'll take a look at what we have here. Macros are blocked. I think that's okay. I don't think we need macros to run here. So applicant, that's that same list of applicants, and then work log here is empty. So, and we'll see here that this one is set up that same way, that it's going to automatically generate that work time as that gets reported. So now I'm going to go ahead and close my work log. Maybe I'll push this off to one side and bring my code up over here. I'm going to go ahead and execute this again. That time it looks like it ran without error. So now I'll open up my work log again, and we'll see that it has put that, it's put that information right here onto this record. If I run it again, we should get another record that looks just the same. And now this is not going to update automatically. I'm going to have to refresh it. And there's a refresh button right here that'll let me refresh. So I click that, and that brings in that second record. Okay, is there anyone who's trying to do this example along with us that is not able to get the record to go into their Access database? Again, if you're on Mac, you're dead in the water. But if you're on PC and you're not able to get it, let's take a look. Okay, so let's come to your immediate window and let's see what your workbook path is. So this workbook, question mark, this workbook.path. Typing under pressure. Folks are wondering, what takes them so long to type that? Okay, so yeah, there might be other people that have the same problem but haven't said anything yet. So it turns out that VBA knows how to work with your local file system just fine, but something that's come around and is becoming actually quite common now. Let me open up Notepad. Is to have like your files actually like where they really live is in the cloud. And like they're really on OneDrive, and when you try to use that file, it downloads that file for you to be able to use locally. But if you've got a file that's like, if your workbook is on OneDrive, when you say, if you say like in the immediate window question mark this workbook, dot path, it will echo something like this. You saw me do it. I think you saw me do it earlier. C:\\users, Allen2, etc. But if you do that and it comes with something like this, https://SharePoint, what does it say after that for yours? Does it say SharePoint? My and then it might have some other stuff after this as well. So this is saying, oh, this is like a OneDrive location. And VBA is like, I have no idea what that means. It just doesn't know how to work with it. So you've got to get both of these files saved in a location that when you say, what's the path of this workbook, it comes up with a format that looks like this, C:\\. Probably your downloads folder will probably be that way. Your desktop is usually that way. But I've seen situations where both of those are configured to be on OneDrive as well. So really, for any time you're working with an assignment in this class, it's probably a really good idea to be on a local drive, because I think our very next homework assignment is going to have that problem as well. So that's the issue. So can you get that to a drive? Let's see, I even forgot who was asking. Did that work when you did that? Doing it there. So yeah, we've got to make sure that and this is going to also be true for doing the database assignment for sure. You're going to have to be on a local drive rather than a OneDrive. Okay. All right. So now, I guess what I really would like to do is I would actually like to make this example really work. So let me bring my database here where I can see it, or my spreadsheet where I can see it. And I would like to actually make this code execute every time I change a cell. Whew. Now, we're used to working with event-driven code when we're working on a form. But there's many things there's many events that we can respond to on a worksheet as well. And so let me just go ahead and do this I'm going to do it on the workbook itself. So I can, let's take a look at responding to an event happens to the workbook. So to do that, let me view my Project Explorer. And I'm going to come here, and we've ignored these things so far throughout this semester. So we've got this workbook, and then we've got, like, these are Excel objects. We've got sheet 1 here. And I guess maybe the one thing we might have done is we might have like changed the name of a sheet. So selected that sheet and come here and change the code name of that sheet. But if I double click one of these, it will actually open up a module that is attached to the sheet. There's like a module that's like specifically part of that sheet. I'll do the same thing for this workbook. So make sure I've double clicked this workbook and I'll see the module that's bound onto the workbook. Now, you'll remember that when we were working on a user form, if we dropped down this list, it would give us a list of all the objects on the user form that code could respond to. Plus, it would have a general place for like regular sub-procedures. When I drop this one down, there's not so many to choose from, but because this is the one that's attached to this workbook, I can either write general sub-procedures here, or I can make event sub-procedures that respond to an event happening to the workbook. So I'll select workbook here, and the default is like when the workbook opens. So like when the workbook opens, this code will run. What would happen if you did this? Like if you put that code in, what would it do? Some of you are laughing. What you get it? What does it do? That's right. You try to open the workbook. It says, "Great, we're opening." Close. You try to open it, it would close. Could you ever like open that workbook? Yeah, you'd have to disable macros. When you disable macros, you can still get and modify the macros. You just can't run the macros. So you have to open it with macros disabled and go and change the code. You know, or maybe you do that if the day is April Fool's Day. So on April Fool's Day, it won't open. Every other day it would. So we're not going to do that. Sure, get rid of that. But the point is that that's the default one that it puts here, but I don't want the default one. Like these are all the different events that that worksheet can respond to. Wow, there's a bunch of them. And one of them is going to be, oh, this is an interesting one here, like before saves or before, yeah, like before save. Like there's some code I want to run like just when we're getting ready to save the workbook. Yeah, don't put this workbook.close false there. That'd be the worst place you could put it. Anytime you go to save it, it would close the workbook without saving. But yeah, you might say, oh yeah, when I'm saving, I want to do something. But in this case, we want to do it when. Like, see if you can figure out the event that we're looking for that would be the right one to make our code execute. Can you see it? Sheet change, yeah. So sheet change is going to execute anytime any sheet changes. So it turns out, let me just come, don't do this, just watch this and don't do this along with me. I'm going to come back to sheet 1 and say, yeah, we're looking for a worksheet. So here's selection change. This will execute every time a different cell gets selected. That could be annoying. But we should have a change on this one. And so this is the same thing, but it's tied only to this worksheet. Over here in this workbook, it's called sheet change, and it's like, oh, this will get executed every time a change happens on any sheet. And you'll notice that what gets passed into here is the sheet that it happened on, and close these now, and a reference to the range that's changing. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off first by just doing a debug.print here so we can see it happen. P-H-A-N-G-I-N-G. All right. So now if I come here and change a cell, we're gonna see that I put something to the immediate window. There it wrote changing. Let me clear this off and do it again. Changing. But I have access to these two object variables, sheet, so I can say sh.name, and I can ask for the target.range. I'm sorry, target.address. And maybe the value. So now if I change this, what it puts in my immediate window is, yeah, we're changing sheet 1, we're changing F2, and the value that just got put in there is hi there. Now I can, let's see what would happen if I changed multiple cells at once. I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it over many. It doesn't like something there. So I think the address can be okay, but it's like the value, it says, I don't know how to do the value when you've got multiple cells selected. So that's failing here. And I think for our example, where we're wanting to log what the students are doing or what our applicant is doing, I probably will get enough of a feeling for just seeing what happens one cell at a time. I could probably make it more sophisticated, but let's start off by saying we're only going to log single cell changes. So any thoughts on how what kind of if statement could I put in here that would say, we're only going to do this if one cell is being selected, if one cell is being changed? What property of a worksheet? So we have access to two things. We have access to a worksheet object, and we have access to a range. Like what property of one of those objects might we be able to look at to tell if we're doing just one cell or multiple cells? Go ahead. So we definitely want to look at some property to tell how many cells there are. So the first thing here is to realize that if I look at this address, I'm in break mode right now so I can see the one that we failed on. is that's going to tell me the address. So one thing I could do is I could look to see if there's a colon. I could look to see if there's a colon in the address. But there's probably a more straightforward property that we could deal with. You might remember that ranges are collections of single cell ranges, or collections of cells. Because it's a collection, it probably has what kind of a property? It probably has a count. So can I just ask for the count? Yeah. So that tells me there are 4 cells in that. So I'm just going to look at that. If the target.count is equal to 1, then we want to do this. Otherwise, we're just not going to do it. Well, maybe what I'll do else, I'll print maybe the value of the first cell. So target.cells1. So if you're changing a multiple, we'll just show the value of the first one. So now I should be able to run that. I should be able to step through that. I think that will print okay. Yeah, because the problem was it didn't know how to take the value of multiple cells. So in this case, I'm just saying, you know what, looking at the value in the first one is enough. If I wanted to know the values of all of them, I would have to do something a little more sophisticated in this else clause to maybe iterate across the cells that are there and read the values out, put them all into a string, and or print them out with multiple items. Go ahead and give myself some indentation here that will be a little more respectable. Okay. How comfortable are you with this, responding to events in a workbook? Yeah, so if you've got responding to events in a user form, this is just a pretty simple extension. It's really the same thing. So now what I'd like to do is, instead of doing this debug.print, what I'd like to do is I would like to call my other function. So to do that, I'm just going to minimize this, close that one. Here's my other code. And that's the reason that that record edit is expecting to take both a target and a sheet, because that's what I have access to in that sheet changed event. So I'm just going to do the same thing that I'm doing on my subrunner, but I'm going to do that for my when this happens here. So instead of printing that, I am going to record edit, and instead of sending the active sheet, that would probably be okay, but I have a reference to the sheet that changed right here. I'm going to send that sheet, and I'm going to send this range. In fact, maybe I'll just do this. If it's a multi-cell range, I'm going to send the sheet, and not the target, just the first cell in that target. Actually, that would also work on a single cell range. So I can get rid of the if statement altogether. If there's only one cell in the range, it'll send the first one. It'll send that cell. Otherwise, it'll send the first one. I think if I was really logging a multi-cell change, I'd want to be more sophisticated and do something to let myself know that it's a multi-cell change. But here, at least the code is going to work. So now, if I run this code, come over here and make a change, change that. Let me first refresh my database. My database is showing just those 2 records. I'm now going to save this change in the cell. And that should trigger the change to happen in the database. We're placed, and now it's come in. Now, it's the wrong address, it's the wrong formula, it's the wrong value. Why? Why is it so wrong? Yeah, it's hard-coded over there. So we got to go ahead and change what that insert statement is doing. I'll come back to my record edit. So we're taking in the sheet, we're taking in the target, but we're really not doing anything with it. So here's what I'd like to do, is I would like to set this up so that it looks at the information coming in from the target and then fills out this statement. There's a couple of ways that we could do it. One way would be to like just code it right in here. Instead of putting the sheet name, like I could like close off my quote and ampersand here. Let me just do it really quickly, even though it's not the approach we're going to take. So there's the sheet name. I'm going to replace sheet name with 2 double quotes. And then, so that essentially turns that 1 string into 2 strings. And then I'm going to concatenate in here SH, which is the name of the sheet coming in, isn't it? Yeah, SH is the name of the worksheet. Dot name. So at least we'll get sheet 1. Well, sheet 1 is what it was before. So I'm going to come change my sheet 1 name to be log. I'll call it work log. I'll call it work. Just call it work. So now if I change something in work and then refresh my database, we can see that it's brought that in. So this is one way to do it, is to say when I'm building this string, just build in the right values into this string. It is extremely error prone to do this. And when I say error prone, I mean like while you're writing this statement, it will be a nightmare because you've got so many different kinds of quotes to deal with that it's really easy to make a mistake. Once you get it working, it's going to work fine, but it's really difficult to work with. So let me undo the changes that I made here, go back to where it just says sheet 1. And instead of putting sheet 1, I'm just going to make up like a little, some kind of a parameter notation for this. Maybe I'll call it like this. I'll put it in square brackets and I'll put it as sheet 1, in all capital. So if I was to try to execute this, now it would just actually write that in, sheet 1, in all capitals and square brackets. I'm going to do it just so you see it. I think I'm going to do it. Change, refresh. Oh, there we go. I don't know if I just clicked it wrong, but I got it in there twice. So now, but what I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking this as a parameter that I'm going to change. So after the SQL, after I set up that SQL, I'm going to now change what's in SQL. SQL equals, and we are going to call the replace function. Replace takes 3 arguments, a string to look at, that's SQL. A string to look for, that's my parameter, sheet 1, and something to replace it with. What am I going to replace it with? sh.name. So now that should go back to reading the name of the workbook. Fresh. So now we're pulling that workbook name in. So I should be able to do the same thing here. And I'm just going to change this to address. And we're going to look for address and replace it with target.address. So now if I change something over here in column K, that should cause that to be updated over here. Now it's got the address here. It's got the address, but it has $signs in it. Ugh. Turns out when you ask for the address, it's actually a method that you can pass parameters to. Row absolute and column absolute. I'm just going to say false, false. which is how I think it should default. But I didn't write the language. It defaults to true. So now if I make that change, it should record that without the dollar signs. Well, I'm going to shrink this down a bit. All right, so here's my formula. I'll change that to be formula. And make it a little bit shorter so that I can squeeze it in here. And this to be the value. I'll do something similar to these. So FRMLA is going to be the target's formula. And the value will be the target's value. So if I plug in here equals this cell plus this cell minus this cell, you get object doesn't support this property value. Let's see what I hit wrong. Oh, that's not, what did I miss here? That's value, not val. Val is the, oh, and this also should be uppercase, val. So because it's definitely going to do a string sensitive comparison, and that should take care of that. So that ran through okay. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And so, yeah, now I'm getting the address, I'm getting the formula from that cell, and I'm getting the value that's actually displayed in the cell at that time. Well, we want to get the workbook name, and we want to get the user's name as well. So I'm just going to call this book. This parameter will be book. Do this one at the top. I'm looking for book and replacing it with this workbook.name. Maybe it should be active workbook.name. Active workbook. I'm missing the K. There we go. So that should bring in the workbook name right now, which is dbwrite fall 23. I'll go ahead and change it. +5. And we are now getting the correct workbook.name. Now I got to get the username. There's a way to actually ask, for VBA to ask who the current user is. And it's like the application object has it. So application dot username. And we'll print that out. So that tells me like the name of current whoever's using the application. What else do we have in that space? Application dot username, user control, library path. There may be something else that's interesting here, but we'll go with the username. We'll make this user. Make the same change down here. To be application username. So that should I have that example fully specified out. Let me just put this as equals the sum of that. Refresh. Maybe I'll change the sort order so that my newest records are coming at the top. So yeah, I brought my username in here. Very nice. But let's do something else here. Just to simplify this, what the example I'm about to do, let's actually make a variable called username. And then I hit F1. No. Username is a string. And then we'll set username equal to application.username. So this is now, the code now does exactly the same thing. I've just run the application username through an intermediate variable. And I did that because I want to show you a common problem. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this line here, but I'm going to overwrite it with something else. Let's suppose that my username is Riley O'Reilly. O'Reilly, R. Would that be a capital R? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so now regardless of whatever the username is that we're getting from the application, we're going to override it with Riley O'Reilly here. Let's run it and find out what happens. Syntax error, missing operator in query expression. Ooh. What's the trouble? Yeah. Right. So what's happening here is, and we don't see the error until we try to execute it because it's okay to build the string that way. The string builds just fine. But let's look at, and I think I'm even printing the SQL. Here it is. Yeah. So here's the SQL that I just tried to execute. I'll bring the values down to the next line. So when the SQL interpreter goes to execute this, it does like this. Insert goes great. I know what that is. Insert statement. I'm expecting the next word to be into. Yep, it's into. Now, the next thing I'm expecting to see is the name of a table. Yep, that's the name of a table. And then I'm expecting a parenthesis. Got it. Now I'm expecting to see a column name. Yep, that's a column name in this table. Another one, column name in the table, column name in the table. You know, I could take a closing parenthesis, or I could take a comma and another column name in the table. It's going through, it's getting all this just fine. Closing parenthesis, great. That's the end of the list. The next thing I'm expecting is values. It goes, oh, here's values. Perfect. I'm expecting an open parenthesis. There it is. Now I'm expecting some expression to go in here. Doesn't have to be a string, but it sees that single quote and goes, oh, that's a string. Excellent. Beginning of a quote. All this stuff that's going, that's the string. And it gets to this one and it goes end of the string. And then it gets to that right there. What is it expecting after the end of that string? It's expecting a comma. It's because it needs to have, what is there, 5 or 6 columns we're putting values into. So it's expecting 5 or 6 values to be supplied, however many I'm supplying. So it's definitely expecting a comma next. Like the only thing valid next is a comma, and it sees this R and it goes, that's wrong. It's just wrong. I can't do it. And that's what causes the error. So we have the same problem in VBA. If we want to put a quote, question mark, whoops, question mark, print out this quote. Please press OK. And then we decide, oh, you know what? We want to actually put OK in quotes. We've got the same problem here. Well, it's not quite the same problem. Please press, it printed this. Let's concatenate these together. That'll probably show the problem. The print is just taking those different expressions and printing all 3 of them. I'll concatenate these together. Oh, no, that's not what I want at all. Anyway, it's not doing what we think it should be doing, and that's because it gets to this and it thinks that's the end of the string. Then thinks this is a variable and this is another string, and it's printing all of those out. So the way that I think we talked about this once, and anybody remember, how do I put a double quote in a double quote terminated string? What? Oh, you said slash. So yeah, in a lot of programming languages, you would put a slash in front of it, and that is not the way we do it in VBA. We do it in VBA by doubling up the quote. What the interpreter does is goes, oh, great, here's the beginning of a string, space, please press, space, great. It gets to that quote right there, and it goes, I think that's the end of this string. But let me just check and see if the very next character is a quote. And if it is, it's not the end of the string. It's just a quote inside the string. And so it looks at that one and goes, aha, it's not really a quote. It's not really the end of the string. It's a quote inside of the string. So I'm still going on the string. That's part of the string. That's part of the string. It gets to that one and goes, I think that's the end of the string. But wait, let me check to see if the next character is a quote. And it goes, oh, the next character is a quote. That really wasn't the end of the string. It's just a quote inside the string. And it says, great, we've got a couple of spaces to go on. And it gets to this one and goes, I think that's the end of the string. Let me check and see if the next character is a double quote. And it goes, it's not. It really is the end of the string. And so now that will print out that whole expression. So we can actually get that double quote into a double quote terminated string by doubling them up. And that's the same thing that we do in structured query language. And you know what? It's like different from more modern languages. More modern languages would say put a slash character in front of it. That's kind of the way you do it. Like Java and JavaScript and C and C++ and probably all kinds of other languages that I can't think of at the moment. But VBA and SQL are written at about the same time in the 1970s. And that was like the way you did it in the 1970s. And so that's what we have. So what we have to do in this case, we can solve this problem here by doubling it up in this string literal. That's not a very satisfying solution, but let me just go ahead and show that that does solve the problem. I'm going to stop the code and run it again. So that fixes the problem, but is it going to have now two quotes? Are those two quotes going to be in the data? Or is it going to have one quote? Like when I refresh this, what are we going to see? Is the username going to be O'Reilly with one quote or with two? Or with one apostrophe or two? Let's vote. Who says just one? Who says, no, they're both going to be there? Oh, wow, that'd be a good test question. Refresh all, and it comes in with just one. And the reason it comes in with just one is because it's happening just the same way that it happens with VBA up here, is that we put the two in there, but it's like a code to tell the interpreter that's not really two quotes. It's not really the end of the quote. It's just a quote inside the string. So what I'd like to do here is instead of like hard coding this, because this is actually going to come in to me this way, if that's what the user's name is, I'd like to create another little function here that will kind of get my string ready. I don't have to do this every time because there may be several things I want to do. So let me go ahead and do this. Let me make another sub procedure down here called prep SQL. And I'm going to pass it some data as a string. I'm going to pass it data as a string. Yeah. Well, ultimately, this is going to return something, but let's do this. Let's start off kind of dim temp as a string. Temp equals, and we'll just call the replace function here. Replace. I'm going to look at the data that gets passed in. I'm going to look for something. We've got just a zero-length string right now. I'm going to replace it with something else. This is going to look terrible. But what am I looking for? A single quote, an apostrophe. I'm going to replace it with two of them. The fact that I'm putting single quotes inside these double quotes is a little bit annoying. That's the single quote, and that's two single quotes. Your font, it probably looks better than it does on my font. You know, another way to do it might be like this. Let me just ask what the ASCII value is of a single quote, number 39. So I could look for character 39. That's a single quote. And I could replace it with two of them. So now, instead of just doing the username here, I am going to, oh, and then I'm going to have this return temp. So prep SQL equals temp. So now instead of just popping the username in here, I'm going to prep SQL. Prep SQL. So before it actually does the replace here, it's going to say, hey, what is the prep SQL version of the username? So I'll make a change. Oh, this is a sub. This needs to be a function. Because I'm returning a value. So we can see that as we look at the SQL that's getting executed, that has doubled up that single, quote. So it's done that right here. And if we refresh this, we should see that value coming in just fine with a single quote. Now, I might get a little more sophisticated with my prep SQL. And I'm going to show you this. Because it will help with a specific problem that you're going to come across on the project. And that is, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it on, in fact, active workbook name. Can an active workbook name have a single quote? Can a workbook name have a single quote? I think it can. So I better do the same thing for the, in fact, I'm going to do it for all of these. You know what? If there's a single quote, I just want to double it up. Sheet name might have a single quote. I don't know if they're allowed, but if the case they are, I'm going to prep it. Address, same thing. I'm just going to prep SQL on all of these. Formula. Oh, that could definitely have a single quote in it. And the value could have a single quote as well. So I'm just saying, hey, I want to prep SQL on all of those. Well, let's look at this value one. So I'm going to come up here for value. And I'm going to say, that really doesn't need a quote around it if it's numeric. And in fact, like, you have to insert like the report year. That's going to be numeric in the example that in the project that you're doing. So in fact, I'm going to take the quotes off of all of these. Instead of putting the quote as part of the SQL, I'm going to bring the quote in as part of the parameter. So I took the quotes off from around val, I'm taking the quotes off of around formula, taking the quotes off of around, I'm taking all these quotes out. Because I need, in SQL, I need the quotes the same time that I need the quotes for in VBA. And that is, if I have a string literal, I got to put quotes around it. But if I have a numeric literal, no quotes are required. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, listen, I don't need the quotes around any number values here, and especially that value could be a number very easily. So my prep SQL is not only going to look for single quotes, but it's also going to look to see if it needs to have quotes around it. So before I send the temp back, I'll do this. I'm going to say if is numeric. If is numeric data, then I want to do something else. I want to do what we were doing before. If it's not numeric, I want to replace the string. I want to get rid of the quotes. I can't have a quote in a number. So I'm only going to replace the single quote with two single quotes if it's not numeric. But if it is numeric, actually, if it is numeric, I don't want to put the quotes around it. So let's do this. If not is numeric, then temp is going to be, yeah, replace that replace a single quote with a double quote, replace a single quote with two single quotes. But let me put on the end of this the quotes as well. So I'm going to put on an ending single quote after I do the replace, and before I do the replace, I'll put another one on. So if what I sent down was a string, let's put quotes around it. Otherwise, let's not put quotes around it. So now I'm going to do one of these that actually has a numeric output, and we'll take a look at the SQL that gets generated. So I'll edit this, change it to +4. Variable not defined, DATA. Oh, looks like I have an error. Let's see what we have for my error. Let me look at this statement. Oh, in that case, oh, if it is numeric, there we go. Let me go back to if it is numeric. Problem was I never set temp equal to data. If it's numeric, I just want temp to equal data. Otherwise, we're going to put the quotes around it. So we'll stop that and try it again. Got that in a bad place. Let's go ahead and get it to where we can see what it did. So the point here is that all those that were strings have the single quotes around them, but my numeric ones don't. And they don't need to be there because in SQL, just like VBA, if I have a numeric literal, I don't need quotes around it. So you're going to have to be thinking about when I need quotes versus when I don't need quotes. Now, I'd like to do one more thing here. And that is, I'm going to treat something that's kind of a difficult part in working with databases. And that is, how do we handle the absence of a value? So I can change this to like have no value. I'll just delete that. And that's going to cause this to come up with no value in here. But what that actually executed is it actually inserted a zero-length string. Right? That is two single quotes with nothing in between it. And it turns out that in SQL, just like in VBA, a zero-length string is different from the absence of a value. And so what I'd like to do here is I'd like to say, listen, if there's no value supplied, I want to give it the right word in SQL to tell it there's no value. So instead of quote, quote, I'm going to put NULL with no quotes around it. If I put quotes around it, it's going to actually insert the 4 characters NULL. I don't want that. I want null without quotes, which is saying there's no value here. In most databases, the absence of a value, like null, looks exactly the same as a zero-length string because there's just nothing to see. So this can be kind of confusing. But let me go ahead and execute that, and then we'll be out of time. So I'm going to do here is that if, like the very first thing I'm going to do is we're going to say if its length is 0, we want it to be null instead. So maybe I'll do that right here at the very end. I'm going to say if the length of temp is equal to 0, then temp equals, in quotes, NULL. Now, if I leave the quotes off here, that's valid syntax because null means something in VBA. It means the absence of a value. But what I want is a string null, double quotes around it, because I want that to go into my query. So now when I delete something, the query that it runs is going to have the word null in it. Oh. All right, we are out of time. I'm going to see what I've got wrong here. I was expecting that to say NULL here. I'll make sure that I get that corrected so you have that in the example before I post it. Do you see the problem? Ah, right. That's what's happening here. So let's just do this. I'm going to do that before I do the if statement. I'm going to say if the length of data is 0, then I'm just going to return null. And exit the function. So my very first check is if nothing's getting passed in, send back null without quotes. So take a look at that, delete this. And now we've got for both the formula and for the value, we're inserting the absence of a value. If I was to run a query over here in Access, and now I could select, you can actually see the difference between a zero-length string, which records have a zero-length string, and which ones have the absence of a value. And so I'll go ahead and do that as the last part of this recording so you can see that later, but I won't hold you around for it. So thanks for coming. Class dismissed. Here's that query. I'm going to create query, design view, take it into SQL, select star from work log, where value is null, where cell value is null. And you can see that I have just the one record there. But if I look at that query where the cell value is equal to a zero-length string, quote, quote, that's going to bring a different set of records because null and a zero-length string are different. All right. Good luck on the project.